What's happening, friends, and shalom? Welcome to this episode of the Watchdog, exclusively on the Synagogue News. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you that we are living in biblical times, and I'd like to thank all of you for showing up here. Again, this is exclusively on the Synagogue News. I want to remind you guys to think like a Neanderthal. Let's go ahead and get right into the usuals for the day so we can just jump into our articles. I want to remind you guys to like and share this video. If you are here, please consider subscribing. If you're new to the channel, hit that bell to get notified every time we go live. We try to post these every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday with pretty low degrees of success, to be honest with you, but nonetheless, that's what we try to do. And again, please consider hitting that bell to get notified of that. Excuse me. Don't really have big announcements as far as anything coming forward, but I do want to encourage you guys to share this out to all the different social media platforms which you frequent. Of course, what good is a message without an audience to hear it? And while you're out and about frequenting social media platforms, I would just like to encourage you to frequent some alternative social media platforms, things like Gab, Parler, Minds, MeWe, Telegram. These are the different platforms that I think will help us actually fight back against the big tech overlords and take back freedom of speech online if the Lord indeed wills it. So definitely consider, if you are a Twitter man, getting on Gab, Parler, or Minds. If you are a Facebook person, getting on MeWe or Telegram. And by the way, if you like this show, you should definitely consider some of the YouTube clones as well, specifically Rumble, because that's where we've had success posting. But conservative political content is definitely something that YouTube isn't particularly fond of. And so as a result of that, we definitely encourage you to go to rumble.com and subscribe to the Synagogue there. I only post my political podcasts there. So I don't know why I don't call it the Synagogue News yet. I've just got the same name as my old channel, or my other channel, I should say. But nonetheless, that is where we always end up posting this content after the fact. So we're not going live there, but we do actually post there after the fact. And also that will probably end up being the place where our content remains at some point in time, right? Right now, obviously, by God's good graces, we are on YouTube. But when the YouTube overlords decide that they've had enough of me, then it is going to be Rumble that the Lord has seemingly provided us at this point in time. And that's where we'll be moving to, right? So definitely want to consider encourage you, to consider joining us over there on Rumble. So the pre-article discussion is what we're going to get into right off of the bat. And my first thing to discuss today is actually a little bit of a online controversy that has been responded to by others in the Christian news and also apologetics YouTube kind of sphere. So Dave Ramsey recently made some comments about raising the rent simply because the market is about whether or not it was good to raise the rent on your land simply because the market value is going up. In other words, you don't need the money. It's not actually benefiting you in any way other than the fact that you're getting more money and keeping up with market prices. And Dave Ramsey essentially said that he thought that was good and that was a positive thing to do from an investing standpoint that's probably going to get you a better bang for your buck and would end up being wise financially all around. And some people took that the wrong way. What I mean by that is that they were kind of offended by that notion, saying that such and such a thing was unbiblical. And then that was responded to by a gentleman by the name of A.D. Robles, who you guys may actually know of. Who does a lot of these sort of reports on not just news, but specifically like church news, right? And YouTube apologetics and stuff like that. And yeah, they were all actually having these good conversations and all that kind of stuff. And so I just wanted to comment a little bit on what was said. So starting at the beginning, Dave Ramsey was saying, and I'm obviously being very general with this, right? But Dave Ramsey was saying something akin to, it is a good and wise financial decision, it's good for your investment to raise the prices on your land, raise the prices on the homes you own or the condos you're renting or whatever it happens to be, simply because the market price itself is rising. Basically saying, hey, look, this is how much I can get for this. This is how much I'm currently getting for this. I realize I can get more, and so I want to get more. That's simple, and that's perfectly fine and dandy, is basically what Dave Ramsey had said. What others were saying in response to this is that this is an unbiblical thing to do and that it is greedy, right? To simply raise prices because you want to keep up with the market or because you want more money is a greedy thing to do, these people said, right? And therefore would be in contrast with biblical principles. And then what Mr. Robles was saying is basically, no, that's absolute nonsense. You can do whatever you want with your property, whether that is, having it at a loss so that you can run a charity, or making as much money as you want because you actually happen to be a greedy person, right? It's literally your property, do whatever you want kind of a mentality, right? And what I wanted to comment on in particular was AD Robles' video, because that's what I had watched. It actually just came out about 11 hours ago. But basically that whole notion, I think it kind of misunderstands where we should want to be, not just as Christians or conservatives, but just as human beings, I think, right? And how we should want to think about these sorts of things. Now, if you ask yourself the question, can a landlord do whatever they want with their property? Absolutely, 100%. If we're talking from a political standpoint, what the law should be, I am 100% with you in that regard, right? And I would actually fight for that, politically speaking. I think it's absolutely absurd that any country or international body or state or county or city or religious body or whatever it happens to be, that any group would try to tell you what you can or cannot do with your property. That's absolutely absurd. And it should be something that is not acceptable in this country or in any free country for that matter. But with that being said, there is a different question to ask that I think more hits to the heart of the matter, and that is, should you do whatever you want with your property? And I think the answer to that is very obviously no, right? Very obviously no. I personally think that it is a good and moral thing for landlords to, provided they're not harming themselves, of course, right? For landlords and really anybody to provide a product in such a way that the customer is able to actually afford it, and specifically a lower income customer, right? Biblically speaking, I think these principles are very clearly set forward when we have things like the Sabbath year, where people like the foreigner and the slave and the destitute are able to just come and freely take food from your field, right? We see this set forward also in Leviticus when it says things like the worker and the ox is worth their wages and they're able to eat of the field while they work there. We see this in the New Testament when Jesus says things like, if a man has you walk a mile, walk another, right? In none of these instances are Moses or Jesus trying to say, hey, you owe people the food from your field. You owe people this extra mile to walk, right? That's not the point at all. And it entirely misses what is being communicated by these two men. The point is, you should do this out of the kindness of your heart. Not you owe these people these things, but that it's a good thing to do these things because you have care for your fellow man, right? And personally, I think that that is the way that we should look at these things, especially when you're talking about things like, we're not talking about selling haircuts here. We are actually, in fact, talking about people's livelihoods, right? You raising the rent to some absolutely absurd number is going to end up getting people kicked out of their homes, right? Because they can't afford to pay that. Because let's be honest, the rate of inflation is far outpacing the rate of wage raising, right? How would you say that? The rising of wages, right? I worded that terribly, right? That's just a fact, right? We know that's a fact. That's one of the things we constantly warn about when we warn about inflation, is that that's always a fact. Wages never rise as fast as hyperinflation. That's kind of why we call it hyperinflation, right? And so you're not just making decisions about how much is somebody going to have to pay for you, clipping their toenails or giving their dog a nice perm or something like that, right? You're actually talking about people's livelihoods. Now, again, that doesn't mean that the state or anyone else should be forcing you, or even shaming you for that matter, into doing a certain thing with your property. I think that entirely misses the point. Rather, much like Moses and Jesus have already said before us, that's what you should do. We should want to go out of our way to care for the destitute, the widow, the orphan. Back then they would say the slave, but we obviously don't have slaves today, right? But the point is, people who are down on their luck, right? You should want to care for those people, not because you're obligated, not because the state tells you. If the state tells you, then we have a problem, right? But because that is what we as good people should want to do. I don't understand why that's a complicated thing, to be honest with you. And AD actually gave the example. He's like, well, what if somebody said, hey, I feel like I'm actually worth more and you're not able to pay me what I think I'm actually worth, so I'm going to go and work somewhere else. Well, once again, that's definitely your right. You have a right to do that. Of course you do. Nobody has the right to force you to be employed for somebody, especially if you can make more money elsewhere, right? But I can just say personally, I've absolutely taken a lower paycheck before because it wasn't going to hurt me, right? It wasn't going to put me in a situation where I couldn't care for my family. But these people who I was taking the lower paycheck for, they couldn't afford to pay me anymore. Me leaving was going to cause a massive problem for the company. And they had been very good to me. They'd been very loyal to me in the past, right? Loyalty is, again, another one of these things that I think is good, even though it puts you at a disadvantage sometimes. In this case, I could have been making more money. You see what I'm saying? You can't say that's a bad thing. It's not like I was obligated to give that, but that doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. In fact, it's a very good thing. In fact, one might actually go as far as to say that's a very Christian thing and a biblical thing. And personally, I think that's the way that we should look at this kind of stuff. The state has no business telling you what to do. If we want to talk about what the state is saying, I'm laissez-faire, right? Absolutely free market. There's no reason whatsoever for the state to be telling you what you can and cannot do with your own property, right? But I'm not talking about the state right now. I'm talking about your heart and what you should want to do. Obviously, you should want to make sure that you're safe. Obviously, you should want to make sure that your family's taken care of. Obviously, you should want to make sure that you're well fed. But you should also definitely make sure that you're caring for other people. And I think that's a given, personally. I think that's a given. But with that, that's the pre-article discussion for today, friends. I do see Cryptomaria is in the live chat. Thank you very much for being here with us today. And anybody else who has not made themselves known in the live chat but is here, I want to go ahead and thank you guys very much. 1 second. I do actually have a little bit of experience with that, Cryptomaria. So I'm sorry to hear that you're going through that, but we will definitely be keeping you in our prayers here. So let's go ahead and jump into some of the stuff that we want to talk about today. A lot of very interesting things. First off, I want to say briefly, the title that I had today was to reference the fact that though it seems like we are continuously losing politically, losing as far as inflation is rising, losing as far as the culture is dying, losing as far as people's liberties seem to be taken, all these other kinds of things. We constantly are getting knocked down, and very often we are actually responsible for it, such as when we generally, as in conservatives, had this sort of cultic adoration for Donald Trump, right? Though we may fall and though we may fail, we will press forward. And eventually, I think we will win. Now, whether or not that's winning here or winning because we translate into the next life, for a colloquial way of putting it, I guess, God's will be done. But in the end, I do think that we are going to be victorious in this fight. And of course, it's not a literal fight, so please don't look into my words too heavily. But nonetheless, so I just kind of wanted to use the title as sort of a words of encouragement there. Some of the things that we'll be talking about today are actually very positive, in my opinion. Of course, some of them are also very negative. So, you win some, you lose some. It's just kind of the nature of life. But we obviously will continue to press forward and fight for what is actually good and true. And you obviously should be there with us. I encourage you to be there with us, despite the fact that we are constantly, seemingly, failing and face palming all of the time. We're actually going to start off with a rather positive video, although a little bit of a trigger warning. We are going to be discussing things such as sexual assault and pornography in the next portion here. So really quick, let me go ahead and get my camera on and also my screen shared. I also got to set up some banners here, so just one moment. Sorry, friends. That took a lot longer than I expected. So let's go ahead and get this up here. And I actually did not get my camera even started there, so my bad. There we are. Cool. All right, let's get into this today. So our first story that we're going to be discussing, you guys know I have been keeping up very much. Well, those of you who watch this show consistently will know I have been keeping up very much so with the Pornhub Girls Do Porn case. I did warn you guys that this was going to be the topic, right? So for those who need a little bit of a refresher or who may not be familiar with the story, Girls Do Porn was a pornography company, a former pornography company that actually got taken down because it was involved in sex trafficking, in profiting off of rape, and in actually publishing videos with minors in the videos, of course, doing the different sexual things that they were doing, right? Now, I have consistently referred to these people as Pornhub victims, not just Girls Do Porn victims, because it is very firmly established at this point, at least to the best of, to a position that I would consider to be reasonable. I guess I should probably be more articulate when I speak. Been well established beyond a reasonable doubt, as far as I'm concerned, that Pornhub actively knew what Girls Do Porn was doing and decided to profit off of their videos anyways. But what we saw actually happen recently in the month of December was very awesome. Big win for these girls, and that is that these victims actually won the right to, actually won the right to their videos. I shouldn't even really, I just feel uncomfortable referring to it as their videos as if they had actually wanted to do this, right? But regardless, the point is they now have the legal rights over the videos in which they were victimized, right? No longer can anybody else profit off of this. You can be slapped with lawsuits, or even, I don't know how, maybe they want to like copyright it or something like that to just for the sake of preventing people from actually propagating it. I don't know exactly how that would work. Sorry, there's ads that I don't really get a choice in that pop up here. But nonetheless, regardless, them down. Yes, it has been officially decided in court. It's amazing that this had to be decided in court, that Pornhub wouldn't just say, hey, we don't want videos of minors on our site. We don't want videos of sex trafficking victims on our site. We don't want videos of rape on our site. But they're like, nah, we'll actually fight this in court. Well, you lost. And now these women actually have the right to force you to take them down. Thank the Lord. The women have been battling for control of the video since 2016. And again, I have been doing numerous videos on the topic. If you'd like to see them here. You need to get an ad blocker because they always have inappropriate ads. Every time you go to the news, it's always some kind of, they think that it's going to be specifically geared to you, right? And of course, I'm a man in my early 20s, so what do I constantly get? Sex stuff. It's just terrible. But, what are you going to do, right? What are you going to do? Get an ad blocker. That's what you're going to do. A group of hundreds of women who argued that they were tricked or coerced, into making pornographic films have won the rights to the videos after a lengthy legal battle. The U.S. Department of Justice ruled in favor of hundreds of women who wanted ownership of the videos. Oh, shoot. This was not making me register beforehand. I'm sorry. I thought that when I actually originally had this article up, it wasn't making me register, but now it's saying that we have to. All right. Well, the point is, sorry about that, friends. That's sort of weak. But you guys get the idea. The girls do porn victims have won the right. I hate that happened, actually, because article up and ready, and it was allowing me to read it, and now it's not because whatever. That's their right? They have every right to do that. So moving on to our next news article. The point is they won the rights. They have to take these videos down. And yeah, I guess that gives us some more time for something else. So here's the next thing we're going to talk about, and hopefully in a much more prepared fashion. Church leaders recently come out in warning against, drum roll please, I'm not obviously good at doing this, Israel. Shockingly enough, yes, they're warning against Christian persecution in Israel. Now, before we get into the article, I just want to point out, this is one of those things that is going to have to be taken with a grain of salt for two reasons. Number one, there is definitely an ultra-Orthodox faction in the Israeli government that seeks to persecute specifically Messianic Jews. Specifically Messianic Jews. Not so much Christian Gentiles, but specifically Messianic Jews. Some of the more radical ones certainly do want to also persecute Christian Gentiles, mostly the Syriac and Arab ethnicity, but there are obviously Christian Gentiles from other ethnicities in Israel as well. And there are some radicals in the ultra-Orthodox wings that do wish to persecute them as well. But for the most part, the persecution seems to be centered on Messianic Jews. But the point is, that definitely is happening in Israel. The second thing that causes us to have to take this with a grain of salt is these people are kind of anti-Semites. And I don't mean the Christians, I mean the World Council of Churches that is making this announcement, right? Now, it's this second fact that actually causes us to have to take the first fact with a grain of salt, right? Because you can't ever say, hey, I want to discount this information because I want to defend Israel. Israel is actually doing this, right? But at the same time, the information, the people who are who are putting up this defense, right? They're not exactly trustworthy people. And so you do have to kind of just consider that, right? I guess is just the point. The World Council of Churches, the Gospel Coalition, the Vatican, who obviously is publishing this through their state newspaper. These aren't trustworthy people. These are people who have a long history of a vendetta against the Jewish people, right? And yet at the same time, it is also true that Israel is actually going through some very serious, shall we say, tyrannies. Just call them what they are, tyrannies at this point. And a lot of it is directed towards Messianic Jews. So, just note both of those different sides of this coin as we read the article, and let's go ahead and jump right into it here. So church leaders warn against threat to Christian presence in the Holy Land. Church leaders have warned against threat to Christian presence in the Holy Land. Christian leaders in Jerusalem joined forces to warn against the growing threat posed to the Christian presence in the Holy Land and call for local civil authorities to confront the problem through dialogue. This is by Devin Watkins, writing from the Vatican News. It's a very short article. Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant leaders in Jerusalem have released an appeal to the civil authorities in Israel, Palestine, and Jordan regarding the Christian community in the Holy Land. The patriarchs and head of churches in Jerusalem signed a joint statement on December the 13th on the current threat to the Christian presence in the Holy Land. They note that fringe radical groups have stepped up pressure on the local community through frequent and sustained attacks. The aim is to drive Christians out of Jerusalem and the rest of the Holy Land, according to the church leaders. Quote, since 2012, there have been countless incidents of physical and verbal assaults against priests and other clergy. Attacks on Christian churches with holy sites regularly vandalized and desecrated, and ongoing intimidation of local Christians who simply seek to worship freely and go about their daily lives, end quote. Now, that's absolutely true. This is absolutely starting to take place, and it has been taking place really since, as they were saying, about 2012, when Benjamin Netanyahu actually took power for the second time as prime minister, is when this actually started to ramp up, because he started to actually make alliances with some very radical, far-right, ultra-Orthodox groups who were seeking to essentially not only just have a halakha throughout the land, but also to specifically kick out the Christian churches and ramp up persecution heavily on Messianic Jews, who very many of them don't even consider to be Jews. Interestingly enough, the Rabbi Mar Kahana actually did consider Messianic Jews to be Jews, but he does appear to have been perfectly fine with the persecution of them. I'm not exactly sure how he, rationed that out in his own head, but nonetheless. Integral part of the Holy Land community, despite the growing anti-Christian violence, the religious leaders recognize the declared commitment of the Israeli government to provide a safe and secure home for Christians, while preserving the community as an integral part of the tapestry of the local community. Quote, as evidence of this commitment, we can see the government's facilitation of the visit of millions of Christian pilgrims to the holy sites of the Holy Land, end quote. However, the heads of the Christian churches say this commitment is, quote, betrayed by the failure of local politicians, officials, and law enforcement agencies, end quote, to put a stop to activities of radical groups threatening Christians. And that's actually where the article there ends, although they do have a little report here. Oh, no, sorry. There is a little thing they have here. My apologies. That's actually where I stopped reading. So I guess I'm going to be reading this for the first time. All right, let's do this. Preserving Christian quarter of Jerusalem. They offer the example of radical groups buying property in the Christian quarter of Jerusalem, despite Israeli law upholding the spiritual and cultural character of the Jewish quarter. Radical groups, they allege, gobble up strategic property in the area through underhanded dealings and intimidation tactics to evict residents from their homes. They say these tactics reduce the local Christian presence and disrupt historic pilgrim routes between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. Next point. Vital to financial fabric. The leaders point out that Christian pilgrimage, besides being a right, brings substantial financial benefits to Israel's economy. One report by the University of Birmingham estimates a contribution of $3 billion US annually through pilgrimage of Christians to the local land. And I added that last part, but just to let you guys know what exactly they're saying this is coming from. It's not in foreign aid, right? It's actually through Christians who are going to that land. The local Christian community also provides a disproportionate amount of educational, health, and humanitarian services in communities throughout Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. Next point. Appeal for dialogue with local authorities. With these considerations in mind, the patriarchs and heads of churches in Jerusalem call on local authorities in those states to engage in urgent dialogue with them. The goal, they say, would be to, quote, deal with the challenges presented by radical groups in Jerusalem to both the Christian community and the rule of law, so as to ensure that no citizen or institution has to live under threat of violence or intimidation. Begin dialogue on the creation of a special Christian cultural and heritage zone to safeguard the integrity of the Christian quarter in the old city of Jerusalem and to ensure that its unique character and heritage are preserved for the sake of well-being of the local community, our national life, and the wider world, end quote. Let's pause for a minute, because you can probably see, if you're a longtime watcher of this show, why I take issue with both sides here, right? Because on the one end, obviously, there is persecution, and what they mentioned as far as the buying of property, practically nothing. practically nothing compared to what is actually occurring as far as people, having their homes firebombed, having their radio stations firebombed, churches being vandalized, things of that nature, right? Buying up property is nothing compared to the actual violence that is taking place against Messianic Jews, right? But notice that the solution they give is that they want to have some kind of a safeguard, a heritage zone for the Christian quarter in the Old City. Well, what have we been saying is going to happen to the Old City since the inception of the show? They're going to internationalize that Old City. I'm telling you, friends, it's going to happen. You might as well just accept that it's going to happen, because it will absolutely happen, right? They're going to split it three ways: East Jerusalem to Palestine, West Jerusalem to Israel, and the Old City will be an international center for all the different faith groups. It will happen. And they're going to find every way to Sunday to make it happen. Sometimes the ways they're going to try and make it happen are actually kind of legit, in the sense that this persecution is taking place. Just because the persecution is taking place, of course, doesn't mean we need to internationalize an Old City, and they haven't directly said that yet. But that is assuredly what they're getting to. Mark my words. Mark my words. This has always been the plan. Notice, by the way, that this plan doesn't actually do anything to curb actual Zionist extremism. I'm a Zionist, by the way. I'm not saying all Zionists are extremists, but there are extremists, okay? There are absolutely people who wish to persecute the Goyim, who wish to persecute Messianic Jews and Karaite Jews and Black Jews and other different kinds of Jews, Reform Jews, etc., right? These people exist. Absolutely. Now, is internationalizing the Old City or somehow creating a cultural safeguard for the different groups that are there, is that going to actually stop these people from committing acts of violence? No. Is it going to stop them from having political power? No. What is it going to do? Give some other group power over the Old City. Some international third-party group that Israel now has to bow before. And the rest of us will also, right? Just like the United Nations, just like NATO. You effectively give up your sovereignty in certain areas when you agree to be a part of these groups, right? It's absolutely going to take place. It's absolutely going to take place. Worldwide support for appeal. Christian organizations in other parts of the world quickly added their support to the appeal. The World Council of Churches, an ecumenical fellowship of 349 churches, expressed its strong support for the statement and renewed dialogue. Reverend Yon Soka, acting general secretary of the WCC, released a statement calling on Christians in the Holy Land to be, quote, respected and valued as part of both the heritage and future of the region, end quote. Notice, again, World Council of Churches getting involved here, right? Of course they are. Excuse me. Actually, now that I'm reading this whole thing, I'm realizing that I did read this whole thing and that I just actually was being a moron earlier and thinking that it ended before it did. It's a good thing I don't do this professionally yet, right? I'm just kidding. The Churches for Middle East Peace, or CMEP, a U.S.-based advocacy group of Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant churches, also joined the appeal, saying Christian communities are an important part of the Holy Land and stewards of holy Christian sites. Quote, as Christians prepare to celebrate Christmas, this was obviously done before Christmas, reads CMEP's statement, we keep in mind our siblings in the Holy Land who continue to carry the traditions in the place where our faith began, end quote. And again, it is important for us to note this is taking place. There is absolutely persecution in the Holy Land, and we should absolutely be against that, right? I think that obviously the United States government shouldn't be supporting a state that is going to be actively persecuting Christians. So we could always play that card. Obviously, the people will say, well, those who bless Israel, you will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. And I, as a Christian, even have a lot of belief in that, right? But I don't think that would apply when Israel is persecuting Jewish people and Christian people as well, right? I think there's limits to that, in other words. I don't know that God was saying, hey, if you don't support Ahab, for example, then you're going to go to hell and be cursed, right? I just don't think that's what he meant. But nonetheless, I obviously am a supporter of the state of Israel. I'm even a supporter of some of the more radical elements, like I think Judea and Samaria, commonly called the West Bank, belongs to the Jews. I'm definitely not a Palestinian nationalist by any stretch of the imagination, right? But obviously, there are certain elements of the Israeli government that are quite evil, and there are even elements of the government that are not maybe evil, but are certainly misguided. Honestly, if you look at the majority of Kahanism, which tends to be the origin of a lot of this anti-Christian hate, it's like 95% truth, and it's far truer than anybody else in Israel if you want to talk about individual ideologies, right? But the 5%, the 5% they get wrong is things you cannot get wrong, things that lead you to persecute people, to potentially kill people, right? And so, it's a very terrible situation, right? It's terrible to see Israel actually going down this path. It's terrible to see our brothers and sisters, both in Christ and in humanity, and some of those other groups of Jewish people being persecuted by their own state. It's terrible to see the fact that defending is the Vatican and the World Council of Churches. And so now people are going to rally behind these absolutely despicable groups in order to try and deal with an absolutely despicable and real problem. It's very complicated, unfortunately. It all is terrible, obviously, coming right off of what was a pretty good story there. But nonetheless, we obviously press forward and move on to our next article. Next thing we have here, UN to strike at Judea and Samaria, keeping it Israel-centric for a minute. Will the UN go ahead with its plan to blacklist companies operating in Judea and Samaria? This article asks. This is from Israel Hayam, Israel Hayam. And the writer of this particular article is a gentleman by the name of Mike Wagenheim, Quote, the High Commissioner will say privately that she inherited this problem, but we think she had the ability to postpone the release of the blacklist. She knows it doesn't serve any kind of positive purpose, end quote. Former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, says. What a name, Danny Danon. Gotta love that name. All right. This coming March, the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, or OHCHR, which serves as the Secretariat for the Human Rights Council, is expected to publicly update its blacklist of 112 companies doing business in Judea and Samaria, the Golan Heights, and Eastern Jerusalem that was originally released in 2020. However, questions have emerged as to whether or not the United Nations will go forward with an update after previous delays, coupled with strong pushback from the Israeli government, including a boycott of the OHCHR. Much like the recently announced new probe by the UN Human Rights Council, the 2020 blacklist was unprecedented in any disputed territory around the world, meaning it doesn't happen in other disputed territories. There's no other disputed territories where companies that operate in those territories are blacklisted by the UN. But the UN has a particularly anti-Israel bias, so that's why you get these kinds of blacklists. Excuse me. While carrying no force of law and with no accompanying accusations that those listed companies were actually breaking any law, the blacklist was expressly created with the intent to establish a boycott movement against those private businesses and pressure them into stop doing business in Jewish communities, even those under full Israeli control, according to the international agreements. Oh, do I not have my article shared? My apologies, friends. I do not even have the article shared. Excuse me. Let's go ahead and rectify that problem. Boom. All right. Now you guys can read it for yourselves. Quote, the High Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, my apologies. I probably said that wrong, will say privately that she inherited this problem, but we think she had the ability to postpone the release of the blacklist. She knows it doesn't serve any kind of positive purpose, end quote, former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon, told JNS. Danon was involved in discussions over the blacklist during his time in New York. A U.S. State Department spokesperson wouldn't say whether the administration of U.S. President Joe Biden is pushing for another delay in the Blacklist update, while stressing that the administration opposes the boycotting of Israel the boycotting of Israel on principle. The Biden administration re-engaged with the Human Rights Council this past year after the administration of then-President Donald Trump ceased American affiliation with the body in 2018 over its inherent anti-Israel bias, which personally I think we should just leave the UN entirely. But that's just me. I just think it's an absolutely useless organization, and the idea that any nation should give up any sovereignty whatsoever to an international body is absurd, in my opinion. So I don't know why we're a part of it at all. That's one of the things I actually did agree with Donald Trump on, although he didn't go as far as I would. But nonetheless, quote, at the end of the day, you have to look at the result. President Trump thought that the U.S. couldn't make any changes at the Human Rights Council, that the anti-Israel bias was simply too deep. Sometime down the road, after it gives the process some time, the U.S. will have to ask themselves, were they able to actually make a change? I have no reason to believe it will happen, end quote, said Dannon. And I actually absolutely agree with Mr. Dannon here. Ambassador Dannon, I should say, give him his title. 100% agree. Because the reason there is an anti-Israel bias is not in any way, shape, or form based in what's happening to the Palestinians or the persecutions against Messianic Jews or Karaite Jews or Arab Christians or Syriac Christians or Black Jews or any of the actual problems that one could have with the Israeli state. No, the reason these different countries have a problem with Israel is because they're anti-Semitic. And I'm sorry, that's a fact, right? When you have 50 majority Muslim countries and every single one of them happens to be anti-Israel, and it just so happens that the Sahih hadiths, which means strong hadiths, right? Which means canon hadiths, I would point out, say things like, when the end times comes, all of the Muslims will go and slaughter the Jews, and it will get to a point where the Jews will hide behind a rock and a tree, and the rock and the tree will say, Muslim, Muslim, there's a Jew behind me, come and slay him, right? Yeah, sorry, that's not a coincidence. That's not a coincidence, right? When you see rampant anti-Semitism in India, and then India goes and says, hey, you know what? As it turns out, we're not a big fan of the Jewish state. That's not a coincidence, right? Same thing you have in the African countries. Same thing you have in the Central Asian countries. Same thing you have in the European countries, quite frankly. I mean, let's just be honest. The European countries have a nasty history of Jew persecution and a nasty history of Jew hatred and a nasty history of anti-Israel bias, right? This isn't something that's limited to a particular ethnic group. In fact, that's arguably the reason that Israel was established in the first place, right? So that's not going to go away. That's not going to go away. To think that's going to go away is absurd. And there's another bias that is inherent in the UN that we have to deal with, by the way, friends, and that is that they have an inherently anti-American bias that we're just simply blind to because of the fact that we actually sit on the UN Security Council permanently, right? And so we have this great veto we can wield at any point in time where basically literally everybody could agree to something and we could just say nah, and then the UN has to drop it, right? And that's typically what happens when anybody tries to criticize one of the 5 countries that is actually on the UN Security Council. You know, it's us, as well as France, the UK, China, and Russia. Well, even that's sort of not really true, right? Because in reality, it's us and the 2 European powers. People can criticize China and Russia all they really like. China kind of gets away with a lot. Russia, for whatever reason, has kind of fallen out of favor. So it really, I guess, does depend on the group. I should be a little bit more careful with what I say there. But nonetheless, things like that cause us to just completely ignore the fact that the UN has a very heavy anti-American bias. They don't like our immigration policies. They don't like our policies on religious liberty. They don't like our policies on freedom of speech. They like hate speech laws. That's what they like. They like blasphemy laws. That's what they like. They don't like our position on guns. They don't like our position on militia. It's just the way it is, right? But we're just completely blind to that because we have all this ungodly power, right? A nation like Israel can't be blind to that because in the end, Israel is really at the whim of the international world, at least according to, in their own mind. I happen to believe in a very powerful God who chose the Jewish people as his covenant people, but the overwhelming majority of the Jewish people, ironically enough, don't actually believe that. So, there's that. Anyways, the HRC mandate provides for the annual updating the blacklist, and the OHCHR was scheduled to release the updated list of companies during the HRC session, in February 2021. However, in March, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet said that the database report was not completed because of what she said was budgetary constraints and resource challenges. At the time of the 2020 Blacklist publication, the Israeli foreign minister said it was cutting off ties with the OHCHR and Bachelet. But the government went further and is still boycotting the boycotters. It was made public in October 2020, that Israel refused to renew the visas of international staff from the OHCHR, with only Israeli and Palestinian staff kept to keep the office's operations going in person. On the eve of the 2-year anniversary of the Blacklist, the Israeli government and the OHCHR told JNS that nothing had changed. A spokesperson for the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs told JNS that despite an Israeli government transition back in June, quote, there is no change in the way Israel sees the UN Human Rights Office, and there won't be until there is a fundamental change on its side and the way it treats Israel, end quote. Now, I do think there is going to be something that sort of gives Israel what they want in a sense. Like I said, I don't think they're ever going to weed out the anti-Israel bias. But I do think everybody's going to come to a compromise at some point. And I think it's going to involve this thing I keep harping on, which is they're going to split this land up and internationalize that old city, right? Because I think there's a lot of people who are really convinced that if the old city is an international city for all people, they're really convinced that if the different religions get together and form a body, they're really convinced that if the Jewish people and the Palestinian people each have a state, if these things all happen, they're really convinced that there might actually be peace in the Middle East. And you got to give them credits for idealism, I guess, right? You got to give them credits for having a lot of hope. But the thing is, it's not going to happen. It's just simply not going to happen. The hatred's too deep. The bloodlust, if you will, is too deep. It goes too far back, right? This region will never be at peace. There may be faux pieces. There may be temporary pieces. But an actual full-on peace, a shalom, as the Jews would say, is not going to happen this side of eternity. It's just not, okay? The region is too volatile for something like that land be taken from them, and I support them in that. Like I said, I'm proudly a Zionist. And the Arab peoples don't believe Israel has the right to exist, which, though I disagree with them, I do at least have respect for the fact that they have national pride. They believe the land belongs to them, and so they would like it back, right? You got to at least give them respect for that, right? They're honorable in that way. But they're wrong. Somebody's got to win there. You can't just, like, when we both think of Solomon with the baby and the two women who were arguing over the baby. Right? When you have two women arguing over the same baby, you can't hack the baby in half and say, hey, you get one half of the baby and you get the other half of the baby, right? Because then you don't have a baby. You have two pieces of a formerly alive baby, right? Which, of course, there's obviously a point to what Solomon had said there, but just run with my analogy for a moment. You don't have a baby at that point. You have a dead child, a dead baby, and two separated pieces of that dead baby, right? Israel is the baby. Israel, the land, is the baby in this scenario. You don't get to just cut it up and give the different pieces to people and say, hey, everybody's going to be happy. It's not how it works, because they don't have their baby. They wanted the baby. They didn't want the baby's legs. They didn't want the baby's torso. They wanted the baby, right? And somebody's got to get the baby. Somebody is going to get that baby, right? It's not going to just sit there in limbo the whole time. So we may say, hey, we're going to internationalize this stuff, and we're going to create this international body of religions, and we're going to make world peace, and I'll sing Kumbaya and drink the holy Kool-Aid and all that other kind of stuff, but it's not going to work. The hatred is too deep. The nationalism is too deep. The history, the heritage is too deep. You can't just solve these problems by saying, hey, let's hack up the thing that you love so much so that everybody gets a slice. It's not how it works. A spokesperson for the Israeli minister... hang on. No, sorry, this is the right thing. A spokesperson for the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs told JNS that despite an Israeli government transition back in June, quote, There is no change in the way Israel sees the UN Human Rights Office. I did actually just read this, sorry. OHCHR's spokesperson, Rupert Colville, told JNS, quote, "Unfortunately, we have not received any indication from the Israeli authorities that our request for visas will be answered in the near future, nor have we received any specific requests from the Israeli authorities in relation to the possible granting of visas. As a result, none of the 18 international staff are currently able to return, which is deeply regrettable," end quote. Adding that his office has reached out to the Israeli government on numerous occasions without any substantive response. Quote, "We are continuing to engage with concerned UN member states and continue to reach out to Israel in order to sort out the unsatisfactory situation. But so far, these efforts have not borne fruit. We sincerely hope the visa issue will finally be resolved soon and that we will be able to revert to our normal working conditions as mandated by the international community," end quote, said Colville. Excuse me. Among the 112 blacklisted businesses, 94 are domiciled in Israel, with the remaining 18 scattered in the United States, Great Britain, France, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Thailand. The American companies, include international food conglomerate General Mills, known for products such as Cheerios cereal and Haagen-Dazs ice cream, along with communications companies Motorola Solutions and travel lodging website Airbnb, which delisted rental properties in Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria in 2018 before reversing course, under legal pressure. The BDS movement has no noticeable impact on Airbnb's current operations in Judea and Samaria or elsewhere, and none of the companies on the OHCHR blacklist have made any public indication that their inclusion has harmed their bottom line or that they plan to decrease their activities in any territory tied to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Which is to be expected in a way, right? These boycotts don't tend to go as people hope. In fact, when my own side, the conservative group, tried to boycott Nike, they ended up making something like double their profit or 50% their profit or something like that. 50% more in their profit, right? In the following quarter. And of course, the same thing happened in reverse, right? When the liberals were trying to cancel In-N-Out Burger or cancel Chick-fil-A, they just ended up getting a ton more money. So a lot of times cancels actually, when it comes to these companies, these boycotts actually work in reverse, really. But anyways, the OHCHR said it had examined another 76 companies that were ultimately not included in the original list. It has given no indication yet whether it intends to follow through with an updated blacklist this winter. And for those of you doing the math at home, that would bring us up to 188 different companies they have blacklisted. An Israeli government source told JNS that none of the foreign members of the record 24 full-time staff expected to be hired for the current commission of inquiry should be expected to receive a visa. Let me restart that because I worded that terribly. An Israeli government source told JNS that none of the foreign members of the record 24 full-time staff expected to be... Oh, why you got to do that? Sorry, we just had a spontaneous update here. There we go. One more time. An Israeli government source told JNS that none of the foreign members of the record 24 full-time staff expected to be hired for the current commission of inquiry should expect to receive a visa to conduct its work either. The commission's findings should potentially be used by organs like the International Criminal Court to bring charges against current and former Israeli government officials and military leaders, a process that current Israeli Defense Minister, Benny Gantz, reportedly personally requested the Palestinian Authority Mahmoud Abbas put a halt to. In my experience, quote, "In my experience, the Palestinians do promise not to continue with their diplomatic terrorism, to use international organizations as a platform to carry out their war against Israel, but they always, retract their commitment," end quote, said Dannon. And I remember listening to Meir Kahane. I can't remember the man he was talking to, but I was and still in many ways am a very large Meir Kahane fan. The man had very large problems that absolutely need to be addressed, including the fact that I think he's primarily responsible for the persecution against Messianic and Karaite Jews that is taking place in Israel today. So huge problems, right? He's like a Martin Luther figure in that particular regard, in the sense that his problems are not small, they're massive, right? But I remember he was having a conversation on the Morton Downey Jr. show, and I was watching it. Obviously reruns, right? Because this man died in 1990. Morton Downey Jr. has been dead for quite some time as well, but nonetheless, this took place in 1988. And Kahana says, this man believes that Jaffa belongs to him. It's not about Palestine. And the Palestinian gentleman, whose name I am forgetting now, actually responded with, "My mother was born in Jaffa." And Kahana was like, "That's exactly my point. That's exactly my point. You believe that land belongs to you. It's your home, right? So obviously, if it's my home too, then we're fighting, right? If we both think it's exclusively ours, we're not going to split it up." That whole little rant I just went on, right? And it's, what UN Ambassador Danny Danon, is expressing there is exactly what that Palestinian gentleman expressed to Rabbi Kahana, which is, in the end, this agreement doesn't mean anything to them, just like it doesn't mean anything to the Jewish people there also. Why? Because they both think it belongs to them. They both think it's home. And they both think it's their home exclusively, right? You can't just sign a piece of paper and divvy up the portions and say, problem solved. It's just not how it works. It's just not how it works. Let's move on to our last article for today. Let's see. How long have I been going? 57 minutes. I want to really quickly just remind anybody who might be here, please do like and share this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified every single time that we go live. And of course, get this out to all the different social media platforms which you frequent. What good is a message without an audience to hear it, as I like to say? All right, let's go ahead and get to our last article here. Abortion on trial in South Dakota. Yes, abortion is on trial in South Dakota. Now, of course, you guys know I am a self-admitted pro-life radical, so I am very much happy with abortion being on trial in South Dakota. But obviously, we're going to go ahead and read the article here. And, here's the thing. If you guys don't agree with what I have to say on this, obviously, this is a place where you're allowed to speak your opinion. I appreciate you being here, despite the fact that you disagree with me. I also listen to a lot of people I disagree with. So, controversial sort of trigger warning thing in a way coming forward. But nonetheless, how are we ever going to actually have these conversations if we don't listen to people who disagree, right? But again, I'm a self-admitted pro-life radical, so I am absolutely down with what's happening in Texas, what's happening in Mississippi, what's happening in Ohio, what's happening in South Dakota. I'm absolutely fond of it. In fact, I don't think it goes far enough, right? Let's obviously go ahead and get back into the article here. And yeah, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this day because we're about to hit the hour. Abortion rights battle expected during the 2022 South Dakota legislative session. This is an article from Kiloland, I think it is. Yes, Kiloland or Kelloland, however you actually say that. I'm not 100% sure. But nonetheless, it looks like Kiloland to me. Oh, by the way, I see the Trusty Ape podcast is in the live chat. Shalom, and thank you very much for being here. Please remember to like and share this video if you enjoyed the content. And let's jump right back into this. Writer here is a gentleman by the name of Bart Fenkuch. I'm pretty sure the P is silent in his last name, but I could be wrong about that. And let's go ahead and start our article now so we can get off, because obviously I want to finish this around the hour. Abortion is likely to be a major topic during the 2022 South Dakota legislative session that begins on January 11th, as opponents of the medical procedure see an opportunity, to capitalize on recent legal cases across the country that further restricted access to abortion. The anticipated legislation seeking to restrict abortion rights will come as the future of legal abortion in the U.S. is suddenly uncertain, and as a recent poll by South Dakota News Watch shows that 3/4 of registered voters in the state want abortion to remain legal, and that a solid majority of voters do not support increasing restrictions on the procedure. I got to be honest, I somehow doubt that. I'd like to check the statistics that they actually have there, because South Dakota is a very red state, People like to say, oh, Alabama, Texas, Idaho, those are red states. got nothing on South Dakota and Wyoming and some of those center states. Nothing at all. You know what I mean? So I'd be interested to actually see the actual statistics done there, the actual survey done there. I could, of course, be wrong. But it just seems very unlikely to me that 3/4 of South Dakotans would actually be in favor of legal abortion, considering, again, that is a very red state. For several years, Republican-dominated legislators in South Dakota have considered and sometimes passed laws that make abortions harder to get, often by requiring more steps to be taken by pregnant women who want to terminate a pregnancy. Many of those laws were incremental in nature, and were designed to restrict access to abortion without directly violating the 1973 Roe v. Wade U.S. Supreme Court decision that made abortion legal across the country, which the courts did not have a right to do. The courts only have the right to determine, what is or is not constitutional on the basis of what is written in the Constitution. They do not have the right to legislate from the bench. You can read the 14th Amendment, which is the justification they tried to use, frontwards, backwards, sideways, till you're blue in the face, till you're dumb, till you're blind, till all the different cliches, right? There is not a single right to abortion at all found in that document. I would love to see the most brilliant legal scholar on the planet challenge Forrest Gump himself on this issue, because that's how stupid the position is. So stupid, in fact, that I would literally take somebody with the intellectual capacity of Forrest Gump and put them against the top legal scholar in the history of the world and be confident that Forrest Gump would win. That's how absolutely unfounded abortion is in the 14th Amendment. You can quote it for me if you like, but it's not there, right? But at any rate, the anti-abortion movement in the U.S. saw renewed momentum on several fronts in 2021 that have set the stage for pro-life lawmakers in states like South Dakota to potentially push more aggressive legal steps to restrict access to abortion, or even, as pro-choice advocates worry, make abortion essentially impossible to obtain, which is the goal. That I just be perfectly frank with you, I am an abolitionist. I would like abortion to be abolished entirely. I would like it to be a crime. That is my ultimate goal. I'm coming straight out with it. And those of you who watch this program consistently, you already know this, right? But for those of you who are new, how's it going? My name's CJ. I like to consider myself a very conservative person. I am absolutely pushing for the criminalization of abortion. Okay. So when the pro-death crowd says, hey, we're worried that they're actually going to try and take this a step farther, I can't speak for the politicians. But for me, yeah, you don't even have to be worried about some insidious plot. I'm telling you, that's my goal. That's 100% my goal. Abolition, complete and total abolition. That is the only acceptable terms in this particular battle, in my opinion. As of January 6th, no bills related to abortion had been filed prior to the upcoming legislative session, according to the State Legislative Research Council. However, Governor Kristi Noem has strongly signaled that she is likely to put forward measures to further restrict access to abortion, and a leading pro-life advocate in South Dakota told Newswatch that anti-abortion legislation is almost certain to be considered in 2022. And here's to hoping that it does. Quote, it's a very exciting time to be part of the pro-life movement in America, and especially right here in South Dakota, end quote, said Dale Bartscher of Rapid City, executive director of South Dakota Right to Life. Bartscher would not reveal specifics of bills he expects will be filed this session, but he said Right to Life is working with the governor's office and pro-life lawmakers to take advantage of the apparent legal momentum against abortion rights in the U.S. Rights. Quote, it's our goal to make abortion in the state of South Dakota both illegal and unthinkable, end quote, Bartscher said. And again, that's my goal as well. We're like, for those of us who are serious about this, the thing is, it's either taking the life of a child or it isn't. If it's not, as Louis C.K. famously said, it's either killing a baby or it's taking a crap. Okay. This is literally nothing at all. And we should literally be freely tossing out abortions like candy. Or this is the actual murder of a human being and should be legally punished as such. Illegal, criminalized, unthinkable, right? The abolition movement isn't quite as popular as it used to be because of some unfortunate decisions that their leaders made. But I absolutely wear the title abolitionist with pride. With pride. I want to see this criminalized. And honestly, if you don't want to see this criminalized with respect, I think you have very serious questions to answer as far as what you consider to be valuable in a human being. Because let's just be honest here, the arguments for terminating pregnancies and the arguments for terminating Jews are literally identical. They're like copy and paste. And that's just a fact. And it's no coincidence that the originators of both of those arguments happen to be eugenicists, social Darwinists. But at any rate, it's our goal. I just read that. Sorry. Meanwhile, pro-choice advocates in pro-death. Sorry, I'm going to edit this to incorporate my own opinions. Meanwhile, pro-death advocates in South Dakota are aware that they may have to fight even harder than usual in 2022 to protect a woman's so-called right to choose whether or not to murder her own child. Like I said, I'm going to provide a little bit of editorial commentary here. Quote, "We know that we're gearing up for a tough session in terms of reproductive health and reproductive rights." That is such a disgusting thing to call this stuff. End quote. Said Kirsten Howard, manager of advocacy and development at Planned Parenthood in South Dakota. Quote, "We know that the overwhelmingly conservative legislators are in a space to make legislation on the so-called rights of murdering your child. So while we have to fight every year, we're gearing up this year to expect the expected. This is going to be an extremely stressful next couple of months in terms of the work that we're doing." End quote. And again, I did change that to properly communicate what it is she's trying to say. Barsher said possible legislation in 2022 could be modeled after highly restrictive laws passed in 2021 in Texas and Mississippi. The Mississippi law is currently in the Supreme Court, Jackson versus Dobbs. As soon as we have more information to report on for that, we will be giving it to you guys. But unfortunately, there hasn't been much new information since opening arguments. Anyways, which some pro-choice advocates pro-death advocates worry may essentially make abortions impossible to get. Here's to hoping to that. In September 2021, the U.S. Supreme Court allowed a Texas law to stand that bans abortion after a doctor can detect a heartbeat in an unborn child, possibly as early as 6 weeks into pregnancy and before a woman may know she is pregnant. A new Texas law also enables a private citizen to sue abortion providers or anyone involved in helping a woman get an abortion, even someone who drives her to the procedure, which makes perfect sense because if somebody drives somebody to go shoot somebody in the face, you charge them with a crime, right? Because that's what being sane is like. I mean, unless they didn't know, right? That's obviously an argument that somebody can use in court. It doesn't tend to go very well. But, if you are actually an unwilling accomplice, I think there is very often ways for you to get off of the hook there, so to speak, because there's not a hook that you should be on. But yeah, when somebody is being driven to a crime by somebody who knows what they're doing, we charge that person as an accomplice. That's sort of how it works. People think of the Texas law as crazy. No, the Texas law is perfectly rational. Again, murdering a child or taking a crap. There's no in between here. I'm not interested in common ground on this issue. And you shouldn't be interested in common ground on this issue either, because if you're conceding any of my point, you have to concede all of my point. If it's even kind of a life, then that is a human being, right? There's no like, oh, I'm half alive, right? No, you're alive or you're not. It's a life or it's not a life. It's a true dichotomy. No gray area exists on this issue. It's that important of an issue. It's that distinguished of an issue. Last month, I didn't read that. My apologies. Last month, the U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments on a Mississippi law that bans abortions after 16 weeks. Way, way, way too late, but whatever. And has yet to rule on the matter. But some legal experts saw the court's questioning as favorable to upholding the Mississippi law, and pro-death advocates fear the conservative-led court could eventually overturn Roe v. Wade. I don't think that's going to happen. I genuinely don't think that's going to happen. People think that the justices that Trump appointed are like super ultra conservative. I mean, if you look at their records, guys, they're really not. They really aren't. They're typical neocons, really. That is what they are. Gorsuch appeared at first to be the most conservative of them. So far as actual rulings, it's been Kavanaugh. Rulings while being a member of the Supreme Court, I mean. But yeah, I mean, if you just look at their records in the past, these guys aren't like beacons of constitutional originalism. You know what I mean? And I've been saying this since day one, right? Amy Coney Barrett, for example, has ruled numerous times in favor of the state shutting down religious bodies, in favor of forced vaccinations. Brett Kavanaugh has argued that it is not legal for somebody to, and nor should it be legal, which is an important thing to point out, for somebody to actually charge a sitting politician with a crime. I don't know, whatever. People want to say everything they want to say about these justices, and it's fine. If they're your heroes, I guess, then, who am I to tell you no? But they're not these great conservative beacons, and I just highly doubt that they're going to overturn Roe v. Wade. I really, really don't see it happening. If I'm wrong, I'm 100% happy to be wrong. Like, I mean, I've been ranting for a moment on abortion right now. You guys should know I'd be very happy to be wrong here, but I just don't see it happening. And I don't want us to get our hopes up. Still going to be keeping up with Jackson versus Dobbs, though, of course. At any rate, after the so-called Texas heartbeat law was upheld, Noam, a staunch abortion opponent, said on social media, quote, "Following the Supreme Court's decision to leave the pro-life law in place, I have directed the unborn child advocate in my office to immediately review the new law and current South Dakota laws to make sure we have the strongest pro-life laws on the book," end quote. Absolutely love Kristi Noem in so many different ways. I got to be honest with you. During the 2021 session, the South Dakota legislature passed five measures restricting access to abortion, including one prohibiting a Down syndrome diagnosis as justification for ending a pregnancy. That was literally an argument the Nazis used, by the way. So if you're a pro-choice advocate who wants to start saying, "Hey, no, I think somebody should have a right to terminate this life simply because of Down syndrome or mental retardation," that is literally right from the Nazi handbook. They actually took people who were mentally handicapped and said, "Hey, that's justification. Let's go ahead and terminate them." The only difference between a Nazi and a pro-choice advocate, pro-death advocate in that regard, is where exactly the murder is occurring. That is the only difference. People want to say, "Oh, you shouldn't be comparing women who just get an abortion to Nazis." Yeah, the Nazis stopped at 6 million, thank God. What are we at now? 60 million in the United States alone? I think it's unfair to Nazis, personally. And I'm not taking that back. In response to question during the 2021, there we go. Noam recently used an executive order to limit women's ability to get abortion medication through the mail. In response to questions from Newswatch, Noam spokesperson Ian Fury said, did not provide specifics on whether the governor would propose legislation this session or what bills, if any, she may offer. Quote, "Every life deserves protection, and I am committed to taking action to do so," end quote, Noam said in an email to Newswatch. Access to abortion is already severely limited in South Dakota compared to other states. Imagine the audacity of saying, well, we have it good because rape is severely limited in our state compared to other states. I'm sorry, rape should be illegal. Yeah, it's a heinous crime, should be illegal. I know that might be mind-blowing to you, right? You would think that's such an obvious thing. Oh, sorry. Now that we're talking about baby murder, I gotta switch it up a little bit, right? It's not that obvious. Whatever. Abortions are performed only 2 or 3 days a month at one location in South Dakota, the Planned Parenthood Clinic in Sioux Falls, which also provides a wide range of other reproductive-related services, according to Hayward, which, of course, doesn't matter. The Nazis provided free health care and invented rockets. That doesn't mean it was cool for them to be in power. Sorry, it literally doesn't matter. If you murder even one baby, then I literally do not give a damn what else you do. You can cure cancer for all I care. I don't actually care in the slightest. Okay? You're murdering people. That's the important part here. Oh, but we provide all of it. Doesn't matter. Kick rocks. Okay? Nazis provided a bunch of cool stuff. They're still Nazis. Sorry, not sorry. Doctors who perform abortions must be flown into South Dakota from neighboring states because there are no local providers. I'm sure you could probably find a way to make that illegal. Come on, South Dakota, get with the program. Hayward said that outside the state legislature, support is strong for keeping abortion legal in South Dakota, and that a majority of the state does not want access to abortion further restricted. Again, I just don't note that. She noted the statewide, statewide referenda in 2006 and 2008 to ban abortions in most instances was both defeated by South Dakota voters. All right, so she might be right. Never mind. I could be wrong about that. South Dakota voters could be in mass supporting the right to slaughter your children, and that's fine. I mean, the rest of America is completely detestable, so I don't know why South Dakota would be any different. Quote, when we brought it to a vote in the state, the people stood with us, end quote. The people stood with the Nazis, too. As the legislative session approaches, Planned Parenthood is mobilizing members of the medical community who support a woman's right to choose whether or not to murder her children, and will seek to bring forward the voices of those in the state who don't want governments to intrude in the lives and medical decisions of pregnant murderers. The group is also encouraging South Dakotans to contact the local legislators and let them know they do not want access to baby murder restricted further. Planned Parenthood is also willing to pursue legal action on any measures that appear to violate any element of constitutional law, Hayward said. Again, you can't find the right to abortion in the Constitution. It doesn't exist. Quote, this goes down to the rights of people at their core to be able to have privacy and to have rights to their own self. That's exactly 100% right. A baby does have a right to its own self, and you don't have a right to kill it just because it's not autonomous. Okay? It's not going to be autonomous for the next 6 years after it's born. That doesn't mean you can cut its head off. The state of South Dakota needs to trust the women who reside in the state, trust them 100% to make decisions for themselves. No, it doesn't. You don't trust anybody to make their own decisions 100%. Like, but could you imagine if every law that possibly impacted a man's body was repealed? Hey, I just don't think we should have rape laws on the book because, I mean, it's my penis. Do you really have a right to tell me what I can and can't do with my penis? I mean, you've never been attracted to a woman who was dressed provocatively in front of you, so who are you to tell me what I can't do with my penis? Oh, wait, is there another autonomous human in this situation? Another free individual? Kind of changes everything, doesn't it? But not when we're talking about baby murder. Not when we're talking about baby murder. Hayward said that pro-death advocates will aggressively defend a woman's right to murder her baby, just as they would anyone else's right to any form of medical care. Quote, it's not a public health emergency, despite executive orders and language indicating otherwise, end quote, Hayward said. Quote, this is a private medical care and a discussion between an individual and their doctor. And if you look at it as medical care, shouldn't that person have the right to their own privacy in what medication they take or in what treatment they undergo, end quote? No. Not if it means you're killing people. Sorry. Hayward said conservative lawmakers and the legislature should stand on their principles of desiring smaller government when it comes to baby murder, just as they do many other issues. See, now this is one of those examples where you have somebody who very obviously does not understand conservative positions. The conservative does not, like the libertarian, believe that government should be smaller in every single instance simply because. The conservative, unlike the libertarian, believes that government should be smaller, but does have certain legitimate areas of operation. For example, preserving the rights of others, maintaining a properly functioning economy, and making treaty with other nations. Guess what? The first of those things, maintaining the rights of others, would include making sure you're not murdered. And guess what? We would like to make sure that babies aren't murdered. Shocking. Quote, with the conservative supermajority in Pierre, they act like they want smaller government, which they do. But what they're doing is increasing government intervention in your lives, end quote. She said, quote, what's the next thing to restrict? What's the next thing going down the pipe, end quote. Imagine, they want to make us illegal for us to murder, or for us to marry 10-year-olds. What's the next thing they're going to make illegal? Don't you want smaller government? Like, are you a semi-functioning retard? You don't actually believe the words coming out of your mouth. Come on. Absolute nonsense. That's just absolutely bogus. No liberal on the planet who has even got a moderately feasible, a moderately reasonable, let me say, IQ, believes that that is somehow a good argument. It's not. You know it's not. You know it's not. Small government, so we should get rid of rape law and murder law and thievery law because, after all, you want small government, right? Anyways, I'm done. I'm sick and tired of this article. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, friends, if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and sharing this video. Please consider. Well, I'm not sure what exactly just happened there. I think I just cut out with something. But anyways, that doesn't even make sense. Please consider also hitting that bell to get notified of every single time that we go live. Share this to all the different social media platforms which you frequent. Of course, what good is a message without an audience to hear it? And while you're frequenting social media platforms, again, I do want to advocate that you get on Gab, get on Parler, get on Minds. Also follow us on Rumble because these videos are posted to Rumble. And as you could probably tell by some of the things I said today, my time doing conservative political commentary on YouTube is probably limited, if we're being honest. So definitely consider going to those different channels. If you think that this content is worth it, I do aim on making this, as well as the other things I do here on YouTube, a career. So if you think that you enjoy my political content, please do consider giving to the Patreon. If you want to make a one-time donation, you can also give to my PayPal. And again, please do those things with trepidation. We have an overabundance of people giving you their opinion. So unless my opinion is actually worth something, you should not be giving. But then again, for the exact same reason, if my opinion is worth something, then perhaps you should be giving, right? But just make sure you do so with trepidation. And with that, friends, I want to say real quickly, actually, real briefly before I get off, Trusty 8 podcast, absolutely willing to come on. Give me a shout out at some point, or a holler, whatever you would say. Twitter, basically. Hit me up on Twitter. And yeah, we'll definitely set something like that up. I appreciate you being here as well. And also, let me say hello to some of the people who I didn't say hello to before we get off. Jamie Russell is in the live chat. Kelby Quayo is in the live chat. To the both of you, I say shalom and thank you very much for being here today. And with that, friends, I'm going to go ahead and hop off. I want to remind you guys, this is the Synagogue News, and we like to encourage you to remember to think like a Neanderthal. I also want to say that you guys are fellow watchdogs, so definitely remember to do that. And ask yourself this question every day. In the face of Armageddon, will you compromise